Hello, hello. Good evening and welcome to the University of Aberdeen if you are visiting us, or welcome to your workplace if you are not. My name is Doug Martin. I am the head of the School of Psychology, and it is my great privilege to welcome you both in person and online. We have many, many people online. For those of you who are online, we have tried to get a bit of a Traitors type feel to the surroundings here. So we've also got our stunning ancient King's Quad, which is currently lit by flaming torches, which keep going out. And we have atmospheric music. We have tiny bottles of wine, which they seem to serve mostly in the Traitors. We have many, many other things as well. So we are here to kick off the start of our 130-year celebrations for the School of Psychology. We are the oldest psychology department in the UK. And we have been looking a bit into our history, and we feel there is an awful lot to celebrate. And so that is what we're doing with monthly events, starting with this Traitors-themed event. And so that we'll be looking a bit at our history and a bit about the current research that goes on in our school. So please look out for the different events. But we will crack on because it is a packed programme this evening, and we are very, very lucky that tonight we have a special guest, the School of Psychology's answer to Claudia Winkleman. It is Dr. Madge Jackson. Madge.
Excellent. Thank you, Doug. So yes, good evening and welcome. Before I begin, I just want to make you all aware that this event is being recorded. Mainly, the cameras will be on the speakers and the front here, and less on the audience. For those of you joining us online, welcome. Your cameras and microphones have been disabled, so you won't appear. So for 130 years, the School of Psychology has developed and sustained internationally recognized research in a broad range of areas in psychology. And this evening, we're putting that expertise to the test, and maybe under a little bit of suspicion as well. So our panel of experts, who you will see shortly, are going to unmask the psychology behind the Traitors. So at its heart, the Traitors is more than just a television show. It's a masterclass in how our minds, how the human mind behaves. When trust is fragile, information is limited, suspicions run high, everyone around is watching everybody else. So this evening, our speakers will explore a variety of topics relevant to the Traitors. We're going to hear about how we read faces and form first impressions, sometimes too quickly, how context can completely change the way that we interpret other people's behavior, our ability to distinguish truths from lies, and also our susceptibility as humans to social biases. So these are the same psychological processes that we experience in everyday life, except with fewer cloaks, fewer torches, and a little bit less dramatic music, unless that's what you like to get up to in your spare time. Because in the words of Claudia, it is not about luck, this is a psychological battle. So before I introduce you to our speakers, I just want to say a few words about the format of this event. Each speaker will talk for about 15 to 20 minutes each, and they will give us their own insights from their expertise into the behaviours of faithfuls and traitors. I will warn you that there definitely will be spoilers, especially from the first series that finished just last Friday. We'll have a short break halfway through, and at the end, we will open up to questions and answers from the audience here in the room and also our audience online. For our audience joining online, you should be able to see a Q&A tool within your Teams site. That is where you can post your questions, which we will come to at the end. For those of you here in person, you can ask with your voice using the microphones in front of you. More on that later. And when asking questions, we kindly request that you avoid any traitorous comments that may get you banished. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our first speaker, Barbara Ilitova. Barbara is a final year psychology student here in the School of Psychology, and she is an expert in first impressions, and she's going to tell us about how and why we judge faces instantly.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Madge. So today, I would like to start at the very beginning. I will talk about the very first moments that determine the very first impressions that can determine our fate in real life, but most importantly, in the Traitors. First impressions matter, especially in the Traitors, and in a game where murder is always around the corner, our contestants understandably understand that. First impressions are especially crucial before you have had a chance to prove yourself through experience or behavior, and our contestants know that they have to start their game the second that they get out of the car. They are also very hopeful that the kind of impression they make is fun and approachable, and that is very natural, because one wrong move, one suspicion, and their place in the castle can be taken away in a blink of an eye. We are very confident in our impressions, and so are our contestants. They often say that they're an excellent judge of character, that they're very, very good at reading people, and it is natural to think this because research shows that we are very, very quick at the kinds of impressions we make. Indeed, we can make impressions almost instantly. Within 100 milliseconds of seeing a face, we can say whether we would trust someone or we would not. Of course, this is a gut feeling, and because of that, I would like to try something with you all. Okay? So, in the next slide, I will show you a few faces. They will be shown to you very, very, very quickly, 300 milliseconds, and each of them will be followed by a little cross. Please focus on the cross in the center of the screen, okay? And think about whether each of these faces looks trustworthy or not to you personally. Try to see if you yourself can get a gut feeling about how trustworthy someone looks just in under 300 milliseconds, okay? And please do not overthink and do trust your gut on this, okay? So, are we ready? Yeah, okay. So try to pay attention, look at the center of the cross. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Now I'm really curious to see how we did. So please, if you could get a gut feeling, a vibe about how trustworthy these people were, clap your hands. Okay. Thank you so much. This is a wonderful warm-up for the evening as well, hopefully. So, right, if you could not, please do not worry, because we do get more confident in our impressions the longer that we actually see the face. So let's just do one more thing. I will now show you these faces for a little bit longer. Same thing, just keep looking in the middle, okay? Okay. Now, was this a little easier? Please clap if you think so. Yeah? Okay, great. Thanks so much. So I'm glad that this was easier, but still, this is remarkably fast. Like, in 1 second of seeing someone, you can kind of guess whether you would trust them or not, which, you know, these impressions are very fast, but they are also very influential, not only in the game, but particularly in real life. Our impressions can influence how we sentence people, so the more trustworthy a defendant looks, the lesser the sentence that they are likely to receive. They also influence the kind of people who we hire. Trustworthy and more competent-looking people tend to have hiring advantages, and even the people that we vote for. Generally, people do prefer more competent and trustworthy people, but if you are from a particularly corrupt country, then smiling and trustworthy-looking faces in politicians may actually look suspicious. Now, these impressions are very quick. As we've established, they are influential, but they are very, very inaccurate. So they only have a kernel of truth to them. So we need to be very, very, very careful in how much we let them bias our decisions. So naturally, this hopefully makes us wonder, what is it about the face that makes us mistrust them so easily? So almost 2 decades ago now, which honestly feels very unreal for me to say, in 2008, 2 US-based researchers decided that they wanted to figure out what it is about a face that makes you trust or distrust them. They asked a lot of people to give their impressions of trustworthiness on a lot of faces similar to the ones that I have just showed you, and then they used computer modeling to extract the features, the facial features, the configurations of the face, to make an artificial face, the one that you see right there, and manipulate it on the trustworthiness. So I will play this video just now, and as you're seeing the face change, try to think to yourself, at what point am I starting to trust this person? And at what point is my trust starting to fade away? Now, hopefully, you could see a difference between the two ends of the spectrum here. And I think it would be interesting for us to have a look at which features are actually key in trustworthiness. So, first of all, on the left-hand side, you will see an untrustworthy face, taken from the very same video that you just saw, and the trustworthy one on the other side. So there are obviously a lot of differences, but I will start with the eyebrows. You can see that the eyebrows of the untrustworthy face are a little bit darker, a little bit more angular, a little sharper, resembling more of an angrier facial expression, whilst the eyebrows of the trustworthy one are more oval, a little softer, more generally. Second, probably most striking difference are the eyes. The eyes of the untrustworthy one are very, very narrow, whilst the eyes of the trustworthy one are more open and wide. And these have been linked to baby-facedness and innocence, which have been linked to trustworthiness. And another difference in the facial features is how the mouth is curved. So the untrustworthy face seems to be frowning, the trustworthy-looking one is smiling. But of course, there are a lot of other important aspects other than these, such as the face shape. So the untrustworthy-looking face will be a little bit wider and a little bit shorter, whilst the trustworthy one will be a little bit longer, a bit more oval. Then research has shown that texture of the face also matters. So if your skin is smoother, you may appear a little more attractive, trustworthy. And if your face is a little bit more rough, you may appear a bit less trustworthy. And of course, as we have alluded to before, emotion can also play a role. With more positive emotions displayed on the face can make us feel like the person is more trustworthy. Now, I don't know about you, but in my personal opinion, I think that these two faces and these facial biases have really shown themselves in the fates of 2 of our traitors. First one, Hugo, right? Do we agree, more or less? Okay, so he was banished by episode 3, which is very quick, in my opinion. And you can see that he quite resembles the untrustworthy avatar, right? So he's got the wider face, smaller eyes, more of a rougher skin texture. And on the other hand, Rachel, who managed to make her way all the way to the end, she was always seen smiling. She had a very oval, like long face, very nice and smooth skin, and bigger eyes. And of course, this is just a coincidence, it's just a correlation. We will never know whether the first impressions and the trustworthiness of these 2 traitors actually influenced anything about the outcome. But I think it's nevertheless very interesting to see. Now, I have shown you a couple of features that are more or less, that we kind of agree on, but everybody is different. We also don't make impressions of just one trait at a time. When you see someone, you may automatically, or you may very quickly, make an impression of not only trustworthiness, but also attractiveness, intelligence, and a lot of other traits. And in my own work, I have found that these associations between trustworthiness, attractiveness, intelligence can shape the way that we actually form impressions. And for example, if you're surrounded by a lot of lovely, very trustworthy people who also happen to be attractive, you may think that attractive people are trustworthy. And then when you meet someone new who is attractive, you may automatically trust them. On the other hand, if you have been burned in the past, you may think that attractive people cannot be trusted. So seeing the same person may actually make you think you cannot trust them because you find them attractive. So all I'm trying to say is that when you're guessing who the secret traitor is, try to look within yourself, within your own associations. For example, do you have a tendency to trust people who are attractive or intelligent or funny, perhaps? On a similar note, my colleague from the lab has found that we trust the people that we already know. So it's obviously very nice to see a familiar face. And when you meet someone new who resembles somebody you already know, the kind of impression you make of them may depend on the kind of impression you have of the person you already know. For instance, the second that I saw Sam, at this exact moment when I was watching the Traitors, I immediately thought of Jonathan Bailey. I think we agree. Okay, I'm really happy that you agree. Because I could not shake off the impression that I got of Sam because of Jonathan Bailey and like the roles that he has been in. So familiarity has certainly played a role here in my first impression of trust. Now, it's really interesting that we are all so different. And my supervisor colleague at the University of Aberdeen, she has found that this is not very genetic. So identical twins even do not actually trust identically. So our environments and our context really, really matters in the kinds of impressions that we make. But more on that in the second talk by the wonderful Dr. Fiammetta Marini. And thank you all so much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Very interesting. So now we will move on to our second speaker, Dr. Fiammetta Marini. Fiammetta recently completed her PhD here in Aberdeen, and now she's working as a postdoctoral fellow here. Fiammetta is an expert in how context can bias our judgments of faces, and she'll tell us how this can shape the perception of faithfuls and traitors.
Thank you, Marge and Barbara, for the nice introduction. And good evening, everyone. It's very nice to see how many people are interested in the psychology of the traitors. So, today, what I'd like to do is showing you why in the traitors the context is really key. And what I think I'd like to convince you by today is that one of the biggest mistakes that we can really make is believing that we judge people objectively. Why is that? Well, because also the context in which we meet people really matters. What do I mean by context? By context, I mean the company we keep, we surround ourselves with, also what we just saw in the past, and also the setting in which you encounter people. Now, let's dig into the company we keep when we perceive people in groups. Usually, we don't really see faces in isolation, but we often see crowds of faces. And actually, in psychology, there has been a lot of research in trying to understand how we perceive groups. We are social animals, after all. And all this research in psychology is very, very relevant also for the traitors, because in the traitors, participants are working together as a group to try to unmask who are the liars in the group. So there are a lot of group dynamics going on. But here is a problem. When we encounter a group of people, our brain does really not have the capacity to process all this visual information coming from the faces. There is not a lot of time usually to do that. And here's the solution that our brain adopted. Well, we have this mechanism called ensemble perception that allows us basically to rapidly extract the summary out of a group, so that we really don't need to analyze each single face individually, but we can just form a group impression, which is super quick. Ensemble perception can occur, for example, for emotional expression. Imagine entering a social gathering. You really don't need to look at each single face in the group to understand what's the mood of the crowd. Or can happen also for identity. For example, imagine encountering a group. It really doesn't take much time to understand if that group is a family, because they probably resemble each other. Their identities might be very, very similar. Here at the School of Psychology, we also found that we are able to form group impressions of trustworthiness. Specifically, what we found is that when we encounter a group of people, we tend to form an immediate average impression of how much we can trust that group. Specifically, what we did was showing a group of faces, varying in their level of trustworthiness, and then we asked our participants to rate the group in the level of trust. So it could be from 0, very untrustworthy, to 50, very trustworthy looking. Importantly, here we presented the faces for 2 seconds, 1 second, up to 50 milliseconds, which is super quick, like kind of a flash. And what we found here is that it's incredible, but we can extract judgment of trustworthiness out of a group also when we just saw the group for as brief as 250 milliseconds. So really we are super quick at making these judgments. In the traitor, we could really exploit this mechanism that our brain has. Indeed, when the group is under pressure to find the traitor, they often might look for the face that really doesn't fit with the rest of the group. So in a way, we form the average of the group, but we want to see who is different from this average. Look at this video, for an example, from the celebrity Traitors. So here you see that Mark was actually trying to understand who was the person being different from the group. Why it's important also to form impressions from groups is also because the impression we form of a group can actually really influence how we see people in that group. And there's this phenomenon called the cheerleader effect, for which a person appears more attractive in a group compared than when we see the same person alone. Of course, this psychological mechanism took the name from the idea that cheerleaders are usually perceived in a group. But this is not to say that this happens just for females. Indeed, they found also the cheerleader effect happens for males. So for the males in the room, don't worry, you can go out with your friends and look beautiful. Well, this phenomenon was discovered with a very simple but also smart experimental paradigm. Indeed, the researcher here basically just show faces in just alone, on their own, and the same faces in a group. What they found is that people tended to rate the same face in a group as more attractive compared to when the face was presented alone. And believe it or not, but this doesn't occur just for human faces. But this study from the University of Tokyo showed that also if you surround yourself with the images of cats, beautiful cats, of course, you get an increase and a boost in your attractiveness. So what I suggest here is, yeah, if you can, take more photos as possible with your pets, cats, dogs, whatever. Well, what does this tell us? This tells us that an important strategy for the traitors is actually to stay close to those who look trustworthy. And here we can see that Rachel, well, she probably played her game very well, because she just surrounded herself and tried to be friends with people that looked very approachable and trustworthy looking. And indeed, she arrived to the final, and we all know. Well, all these brain mechanisms that we have to perceive groups can actually be really, really helpful in everyday life. Imagine, indeed, to walk on a dimly lit street in Aberdeen. It's dark, it's probably rainy and foggy. And imagine running into a group. Immediately, you will need to understand whether the group is dangerous, or whether the group maybe is probably more trustworthy and you can trust them. And you need to understand this very quickly, right? So that you can decide whether to keep walking on the street or maybe find an alternative path to go back home. Now, let's move on to the influence of what we just saw. Usually we don't see faces in isolation. Also from a temporal point of view, we often see series of faces. Even if we assume that our judgments of people are related just to the person we are looking at, well, this is not actually the truth. Let me show you. What we see now is definitely shaped by what we just saw. Our judgments of faces can be biased away from what we just saw, and this is a psychological phenomenon called negative after effect. So let's say you see a smiley face in the past, then you see a more sad face in the present. If you have this bias, you will perceive the present face as more sad, in a sort of contrast effect between the past and the present. On the other hand, there might be also the opposite effect, which is called serial dependence, for which your judgment can be shifted toward what you just saw. So if you see a happy face in the past and then a sad face, the perceived present face will be more happy looking. Now, here in our school, we found also that these serial biases occur also for trustworthiness impressions. So that imagine looking at a face that is quite medium in trustworthiness, and that face is preceded by a face that is less trustworthy looking. If there is a bias away from the past, you will perceive the present face as more trustworthy looking than actually it is. And same for the other opposite bias. If there is a bias towards the past, you're gonna perceive the current face as less trustworthy than it actually is. Now, all of these serial biases can really affect also the game, also the traitors, because here, there people vote one after the other. And seeing also how others are voting, so in a way expressing a judgment of trust, well, this might affect also how you are going to vote. Let's look at this video, for example, from this last season. So here, as you just saw, there is a series of votes, one after the other, and there is the possibility that the vote that you are giving in the present might have been influenced by the series of votes that you just heard before. And beyond the game, these serial biases can have really some life and death implications. For example, dating apps. Well, in dating apps, you see a series of faces, one after the other. While you are looking for a profile picture, you might think that your impression of that person is quite objective, and you are really matching with that person because of their attractiveness or trustworthiness or so on. But reality is that actually our perception of the face we are looking at is always influenced by the profile pic you just saw before. And this was also shown by this study run in Australia, in which the researcher just showed photos of people and asked participants to rate the level of attractiveness. And what they found, interestingly, is that participants were more likely to rate the face as attractive if it was preceded by an attractive looking face. So this is to say that it's scientifically proven that we are not so good as we would like to on our Tinder and dating apps. Finally, I'd like to tell you more about how the setting can influence our impression of trust. Here's a question for you. Why is it that the traitor is set and filmed in this very gloomy and mysterious castle and not at Disneyland? Well, of course, the setting plays a role, right? And it really makes everyone look more suspicious and untrustworthy. And also, this makes the game very intriguing, because imagine if everyone in the game would be super trustworthy looking and lovely. How bad would be? Like, I would feel very bad to banish anyone, would be heartbreaking, and also the game in a way would be a bit less fun. Yeah, the castle really make us unconsciously think that people are untrustworthy. And there is a bunch of psychological research on this topic. For example, some researchers showed a photo, of a person, first of all in isolation, so with a white background. And after that, they showed the photo of the same exact person, but in different contexts. For example, in a neutral context, negative, or threatening context. And what they found is that participants were more likely to label the face as untrustworthy and threatening when the face was surrounded by a threatening context. And this is to say that our judgment of trust are not very objective, but they can really be influenced also by the setting in which we see a face. And this is true for the participants in the Traitors. Like, look at Steven here, and here is very, very different person, but also, most importantly, probably, even for the host. Look at Claudia here in this gloomy and dark castle, and look at her here, a completely different and approachable person, probably. But this can be really, really important also for us. Indeed, we all use video calls nowadays, and there is research showing that the background that you pick for your video call can really make you more competent and more trustworthy. For example, in this study, they showed faces with different backgrounds. We had a background with plants, bookshelf, home, or also a blank one. And what this research found is that backgrounds with plants and bookshelves really make you look more competent, professional, and trustworthy. So think twice before your next video call job interview, because this can make a little difference. So here we chatted a bit about some crucial contextual effects that can affect how we trust others. And I'd like to finish with this talk with just a few tips for the traitors. Tip number 1. We are the company we keep. So just try to surround yourself with trustworthy-looking people. Tip number 2, what we just saw can really affect how we look trustworthy or not. So take care of that and pay attention to comparison, because who you're judged next to can really make a difference. Tip number 3, remember that the context shapes trust. So if you start to feel that you look a bit suspicious in the castle, maybe why don't you ask people and the other participants to go out and maybe have a walk outside from the castle in some more naturalistic place. That might help. So, yeah, today what we said is that in the traitors, context is really key. But the traitors are also very, very smart, and they keep changing the locks. So it's very, very difficult game. Okay, well, I'd like to thank all the people that work with me on this research, the participants who took part in all our experiments, and of course, thank you all for your attention. I'd be very happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiammetta. That was a great insight. So we are going to take a short, roughly 5 to 10 minute break. This is a chance for you to gather your thoughts on the 2 talks you've just heard, prepare some questions for the end. So we will come back here. What time is it now? Maybe just about 5 to. I think that'll be fine. So we'll take a quick break. So hello, everybody. Welcome back after our short interval. So we will now continue with the final 2 talks. Our next talk is by Dr. Travis Seal-Carlisle. Travis is an expert in forensic psychology, and he's going to review the research on lie detection, which we all know is really important in this game.
Hello, hello. Yeah, so I think what's really cool about this upcoming talk is we've heard a lot of tips for traitors, but this talk is really focused for the faithful. So at the end of the talk, I hope you guys, the faithful, take some tips home to try and detect those traitors. Okay, so there are 3 parts to this talk. The first part really just goes into mainly 2 psychological approaches to detecting deception. And those are these arousal-based approaches, and the other one is this more cognition-based approach. So parts 2 and 3 are kind of unpacking both of those approaches. Okay, so really, I have 2 eras here, and this research stems basically from the 1920s to the 2000s. And throughout that time, this lie detection research really assumed that in order to detect lies, we have to look for key signs of arousal, so physiological arousal. So essentially, this arousal-based theory predicts that indicators of lying are mainly nonverbal signs. So I'm saying things like physiological activity, microexpressions, nervousness, body language. These nonverbal indicators were thought, based on this theory, this arousal-based theory, to be signs of stress or anxiety and associated with deception. That has since changed, since 2000, to this more cognition-based theory, where these theories assume that verbal indicators are more reliable indicators of deception. So the shift has gone from looking at physiological signs to more focusing on the content of what the suspect says and how they say it. So let's just unpack this a little bit more. So arousal-based theories, the basic premise is that lying is accompanied by more emotional arousal than telling the truth. Liars also try to hide or disguise that arousal. So this theory predicts that nonverbal indicators indicate lying. So things like physiological arousal, so increased heart rate, rapid breathing, sweating, etc. Poor emotion management or emotion leakage when trying to suppress or disguise their lie. faked emotional expressions or contradictory facial micro-expressions, behavioral nervousness cues, so body movements, fidgeting, eye avoidance, etc. Under this theory, all of these nonverbal indicators are thought to correlate with lying. Whereas these cognition-based theories, the basic premise is that lying is hard. It's cognitively demanding. So when telling a lie, the liar must concoct a story that is consistent with known facts, is detailed enough to appear to be based on actual experience, and is simple enough to remember if asked about it again. This theory predicts that verbal indicators are going to be indicative of lying. So what you should look for here are simpler, less detailed stories, rigid or rehearsed language, longer response times, or difficulty answering unexpected questions. So under this theory, these verbal indicators are thought to detect or correlate with lying. Okay, so part 2 is all about looking at the validity of these nonverbal approaches, so nervousness, eye contact, and microexpressions. But I want to start out with talking about what do people generally look for when trying to determine whether somebody's lying. The Global Deception Research Team in 2006 conducted 2 studies. In their first study, they asked 20 men and 20 female participants from each of 58 different countries a single open-ended question, which was, how can you tell when people are lying? 64% said that liars tend to avert their eye gaze. 28% said that liars appear more nervous. 25% said to focus on their body movements, so maybe their body movements are more animated. There's incoherent speech or facial microexpressions or inconsistencies in the verbal account. So these were some of the popular responses. In study 2, they carried out a 10-item questionnaire and essentially replicated those results from that first study. So a lot of people put down liars tend to avoid eye contact, for example. Are these stereotypes accurate about liars? So this is what people all around the world generally believe to be the case that are indicative of lying, but are these indicators actually reliably indicative of lying? So DePaulo et al. Conducted a meta-analysis of nearly 1,400 studies of 158 possible cues to deception, and most showed little or no association with lying or truth-telling. So under some conditions, liars appear more nervous and tense, seem less certain, avoid eye contact, or exhibit restless body movements like fidgeting. But essentially what this study shows, this meta-analysis of this large number of studies showed, is that nonverbal cues have no significant relationship with deception. And those that do have effect sizes that are extremely small. So if you notice in the show, a lot of the faithful are looking at nonverbal cues to try and inform their decision about whether somebody's a traitor or not. But what the research is suggesting is that that's all junk. Throw that away. Don't rely on that. A more recent study in 2019 essentially replicated this result. So nonverbal cues of deception are weak and reliable. This is because both liars and truth tellers try to suppress signs of nervousness and attempt to replace this by signs that they believe appear honest, such as looking conversation partners in the eye. So both liars and truth tellers get nervous, essentially. So looking for nervousness cues is not going to really tell you that much. So here's nervousness. So liars may generally feel more nervous than truth tellers, but truth tellers will also often be nervous, and both liars and truth tellers are motivated to hide their nervousness because they both believe it might be interpreted as a sign of guilt. So observable differences in nervous behavior are minimal or inconsistent. And I think one example that I think about when talking about this research is Jade. Jade was under a lot of heat, if you guys all remember, from Amanda. She appeared nervous. Amanda took that sign of nervousness as evidence that she's a traitor, but we all know she wasn't. Eye contact. So recent studies have suggested that rather than showing gaze aversion, people who are being deceptive may actually make more deliberate eye contact than people who are not being deceptive. So counter to the stereotype. So rather than averting eye gaze, they might actually make more deliberate eye contact when lying. So Mann et al. videotaped interviews with 338 participants waiting to board flights in an airport. Half were instructed to lie about the purpose of their trip, half were not. Raters, who were blind to the condition, coded the video clips for the percentage of time looking away from the interview and for deliberate eye contact. And what they found was that there was no difference between truthful and deceptive participants for gaze aversion, but liars showed significantly more deliberate eye contact than truth tellers, so counter to the stereotype. Mann et al. Suggested two possible reasons for this. Liars use deliberate eye contact in order to appear more convincing because they're aware of that stereotype. And two, liars are actively monitoring the interviewer's reaction to assess whether their lie is being sold. Micro-expressions. So if you guys all watched the show, which I'm assuming all of us have, there was a lot of talk of micro-expressions and how that is evidence perhaps of somebody being a traitor. Well, I think it's junk. I think it's actually pseudoscience. It's widely debunked. So the microexpressions are short-lasting but complete facial expressions of emotion that are suppressed within a very short time frame. So in this figure here, I have a few examples of these microexpressions. This idea was popularized by Paul Ekman. Ekman claims liars reveal themselves by displaying microexpressions of the emotions they are trying to hide. But Ekman has not published any evidence for this, and research shows that microexpressions occur extremely rarely, and they occur both in liars and in truth tellers. So you cannot rely on microexpressions. And I know there was mention of microexpressions being included in training guidelines or for federal agents and in law enforcement training, but to my knowledge, that's not the case. I couldn't find any microexpression training in these federal training guidelines. So I don't think agencies are really relying on microexpressions in order to detect lies, to investigate suspects. So how good are people at spotting lies? Well, given the fact that we rely, it seems, on a lot of nonverbal indicators of lying, which I've just gone through showing that they have a poor correlation with lying, it shouldn't be a surprise that we're not very good at detecting lies. So Ekman and O'Sullivan conducted this study. They recruited 509 participants from various professions. So these professions include Secret Service agents, federal polygraphers, robbery investigators, judges, psychiatrists. In many of these professions, determining whether somebody is lying or not is a key part of the job. And yet what Ekman and O'Sullivan found was that many of these professionals were at chance or just slightly above chance performance here. No better than college students. The only group here that was significantly above chance were the Secret Service agents, and they weren't far above chance. They scored, they got 64% accurate as opposed to chance accuracy, which is 50%. So they were just slightly above chance, but not by much. In 2006, Apollo conducted a meta-analysis of 206 studies involving nearly 25,000 participants, and overall accuracy was 54%, again, with chance being 50%. So the answer to the question, how good are people at spotting lies, is it's not very good, and that's perhaps because, generally speaking, we have this intuition to rely on nonverbal behaviors of, as cues to whether somebody is lying or not. So part 3. I think we can get better, though, and there's research suggesting that if we avoid relying on nonverbal indicators of deception and instead rely on verbal indicators of deception, we actually can determine whether somebody's lying or not. And this is where the tips come in for the faithful. So as I said before, nonverbal strategies used by liars and truth tellers when being questioned are similar. Both want to appear honest, so both try to suppress signs of nervousness. They both want to maintain eye contact, making these unreliable indicators of deception. But if you look at the content of what they're saying, that's where all of a sudden you can start to distinguish between the two, between liars and truth tellers. So the verbal strategies used by the two groups may differ. So truth tellers may adopt a tell-it-all strategy, giving as much detail as they can remember. Liars may instead try to keep it as simple as possible to avoid inconsistencies if they need to repeat the story and to avoid giving false details that can be checked. So they both have different strategies here, different goals. Therefore, truthful stories may include more details than deceptive stories, and truth tellers may also provide additional details if asked to do so. So researchers have designed protocols to enhance these verbal indicators, one of which is called the strategic use of evidence. And basically what this protocol is it withholds evidence available so that the suspect isn't aware of that evidence. And the idea is, if a suspect does not know what sort of evidence the interviewer actually has, then a truthful account will typically be more consistent with that available withheld evidence than a deceptive one. Truth tellers will also be generally more forthcoming and provide more detailed accounts than liars. Liars are more likely to change their story once they become aware of that withheld evidence. That's the idea behind this strategic use of evidence protocol. So Hartwig et al. Tested this SUE technique in a mock crime scenario. So participants were randomly assigned to a lie or truth-telling condition. Liars had to take a wallet from a briefcase left in a shop. Truth tellers had to move the briefcase and search the box underneath it. So both conditions, they interacted with this briefcase. Participants were allowed 10 minutes to prepare for interrogation by real police trainees, and all participants were instructed to try and convince the interrogator that they did not take the wallet. Half of the interrogators had received the training in SUE, and half had not. Detection accuracy was 85% in those who had received training in SUE, and only 56% in those who had not, indicating that this SUE technique might really work. Another type of technique is making use of this verifiability approach. So the liar's dilemma here is liars want to provide lots of detail because detailed accounts are more likely to be believed. But they don't want to provide false details that could be checked by independent sources, checked by investigators. So the catch-22 here is they're going to have to provide a greater proportion of information that cannot be checked or verified. So essentially, that might be one key indication there, is what kind of information is the person providing? Are they providing information that can easily be fact-checked or not? That might be an indication as to whether somebody's lying. So methods to aid credibility assessment. So essentially, there's 3 here. And essentially, if you're a faithful, you want to encourage whoever you're suspicious of to say more. You want to ask unexpected questions, and you want to try and impose cognitive load here. Doing these 3 things is going to be really taxing on the suspect. And if that person's lying, they're going to have a real hard time performing under those conditions. So truth tellers would have no problem trying to say more. They're trying to just retrieve that information from memory. Liars have to concoct a story on the spot. They have to provide details on the spot, which is cognitively demanding. It's tough to do. Asking unexpected questions. Again, truth tellers might not struggle with that too much, but liars are going to be caught off guard, and they might need time to think about an appropriate response in order to answer that question. And imposing cognitive load is essentially, you can try asking whoever it is you're suspicious of to carry out another task while being interviewed, or describing the events in reverse chronological order, or maybe instructing to maintain eye contact during the interview. Again, truth tellers would have an easier time doing those things than those people who are lying, because they're trying to concoct a story while also taking part in those tasks. They're dividing their attention, which is a tough thing to do. And then finally, this last technique is called the asymmetric information management technique. So this AIM technique is designed to encourage truth tellers and liars to adopt different verbal strategies. And really, all the technique is the investigator, prior to the interview, tells the suspect, informs them that more detailed statements are easier to assess as truthful or deceptive. So that's all you say. You just tell them, you inform them that the more detail there is, it's easier to assess whether the statement is true or not. And informing them of this should have opposite effects in liars and truth tellers. So it should encourage liars to withhold information, whereas it should encourage truth tellers to provide as much information as possible. Essentially, truth tellers would interpret that information as, okay, I got to provide as much information as I can to really show that I'm being honest here. Whereas liars are going to be, okay, I need to withhold as much information as I can, or else I might be exposed if I provide too much information. So that instruction, that informing them prior to the interview of this, really should have this diverging effect here. Porter et al. Put this to the test. So in this mock crime scenario, that 104 participants, they randomly assigned participants to a truth teller or a liar condition, and to either the AIM or a standard report everything interview. The interview transcripts were rated blind to condition for the number of details. And what they found was that truth tellers provided significantly more details in the AIM condition than in the control condition, whereas liars provided significantly fewer details in the AIM condition than in the control condition. So just based on the number of details, that could correctly classify liars from truth tellers 81% of the time. So this AIM technique really seems to be helpful here. So just to summarize, nonverbal behaviors such as nervousness, microexpressions, and gaze aversion are generally not reliable indicators of deception. And it seems that in the show, The Traitors, that's largely what the contestants are relying on, are these exaggerated body movements or these microexpressions or signs of nervousness or et cetera, et cetera. So get rid of all that. It seems what's far more reliable is looking at verbal indicators of deception, under the assumption that lying is cognitively demanding. So verbal behaviors can be reliable indicators of deception. So generally speaking, liars are more likely to provide fewer details and are unable to provide additional details when asked, provide details that are difficult or impossible to check, are more likely to change their account when made aware of evidence they didn't know about. And they're more likely to have difficulty answering unanticipated questions. Interview techniques like the strategic use of evidence and the AIM technique can enhance these verbal cues and really make it possible to distinguish liars from truth tellers. And that is it. I have some limitations here that I can go through as well, but maybe that's best saved for the Q&A later.
Thank you very much, Travis. Some great insights there. Actually, if I may, you made me think of when Travis mentioned unexpected questions. It reminds me of on the round table when Rachel asked Ross a massively unexpected question about him in the turret or something to do with that, and completely caught him off guard, and it made him look untrustworthy. So it made me think of that. All right, thank you. So our final speaker, we are delighted to be hearing from our very own head of school, Dr. Doug Martin. Doug is an expert in social biases and stereotypes, and he'll explain how these facets of human behaviour can help us understand faithfuls and traitors. Thank you, Doug.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to come down to the body of the Kirk because I'm afraid of heights. So I am an experimental social psychologist who's interested in social cognition, which means I'm interested in the way that the brain processes information about people and the biases that that contains and the influence that that has on our thoughts and on our behaviour. And so to say that I love The Traitors is an understatement in the extreme. So I love The Traitors because it's brilliant, dramatic TV. I love The Traitors because it contains so many of the biases that I'm interested in studying and puts them up there on the screen. Essentially, it's the kinds of experiments I would love to be able to run, but our ethics committee will never allow me to. And so in preparing this talk, I gave my title to Mauro, our organiser, a wee while ago, and only when I was preparing the talk and having seen the series that I realised that the title was wrong. So really, I should be talking about why we fail to see traitors anywhere. And I think that is almost certainly true. So we'll start with a quote that I love to bits because I think it perfectly describes the nature of social bias. And it does so in a bunch of different ways. First of all, it encourages us to think of ourselves as being animals. And we are animals. We're animals with a long evolutionary history whose bodies and brains have evolved over time to become adapted to be social animals and adapted to the environment in which we find ourselves. And so, as animals, we like to think of ourselves as being rational, but we are not rational. We are not in any way rational. And I hope to be able to convince you of that during this talk, that not only are we biased some of the time, we are biased all of the time. We are biased because the way our brains process information is biased. We're biased because the world, the environment in which we live in, is fundamentally biased, and we're biased because we only get a small, unique portion of that world to view in our lives, and all of that influences our thoughts and behaviour. So we are not rational, we are biased. What we are is we are rationalising. We come to decisions and then we find evidence that supports those decisions. And that is what we see in the Traitors repeatedly, and that is what we see in everyday life. Okay. So the challenge for both the players and the traitors and for us is we need to be able to predict what's going to happen next in order to be able to survive. So prediction is the key to surviving. So your brain, while it can do all sorts of fabulous, funky things, your brain just wants to keep you alive. That is pretty much its purpose. Keep you alive and potentially pass on your genes. And prediction is a great way of doing that, particularly in social environments, as social animals. So the brain is trying to keep you alive by making predictions about what's going to happen next. The problem it faces is that there are huge gaps in knowledge. So we have gaps in knowledge because there is far, far too much potential social information. The social environment is essentially infinitely complex. And so we encounter far more information than we can process, so we need to be able to select information, and our brain is brilliant at selecting information, but by selecting some information, you're ignoring far, far more information. So we're missing far more than we are processing. We also have gaps in our knowledge because the information that's really useful to us, we don't even get. So if you want to predict other people's behaviour, you want to be able to see inside their heads. You want to be able to know what they're thinking. You want to be able to know what their motivations are. But we don't get access to any of that. And so what our brains have to be able to do is to fill in the gaps. And our brains are brilliant at doing that. They fill in the gaps amazingly based on their knowledge of what we've experienced before, because on our knowledge of interactions with people. But in doing so, they add bias. They continually add bias when filling in those gaps. So, to the traitors themselves. And so, we start our episode, or start the series with either on the platform when they meet one another, or on the train when they meet one another, but they're not meeting one another as blank slates. They might have their luggage with their jumpsuits in and their chunky knits, but really, they carry far more baggage in their heads. They carry their likes and dislikes. They carry their potential prejudices. They carry knowledge of stereotypes and all of their experiences with people, which means that when they meet new people, it's influenced by that prior experience. And so we've heard already in Barbara's fantastic talk about the importance of first impressions, and we form impressions really quickly. But it's not just that initial first impression. There's what is called a primacy bias, a primacy effect, whereby the first impression you form influences the way you process other information about that person. So if you perceive somebody to be negative initially, then even if you find out lots of positive things about them, you're still likely to perceive that person in a negative light. Similarly, if you perceive someone positively, you're more likely to perceive them positively. So I would suggest that before the players find out if they are going to be faithful or traitors, when they're on that train, people will already have an idea of who they would like to spend their time with. But also, I suspect some of them will be thinking, I don't trust that person. I think they might end up being a traitor before they've even been assigned to be faithful or traitors. And one of the reasons we see that is that people repeatedly in the game later on will say, their behaviour's changed from when I first met them on the platform or when I met them on the train. Before they knew if they were going to be a faithful or traitor, they now behave differently. But I would suggest that every single player will be behaving differently when they were in that horrible, stressful encounter of meeting 21 other people on a weird train, going to the Highlands with TV crews, and your behaviour is going to be different then, but it's only used as evidence when someone suspects someone of being a traitor. So the evidence is used to justify the decision that's already made, and we call that confirmation bias. So we're on to breakfast, sitting at the fabulous long table with the croissant and pain au chocolat, and people really start collecting the evidence. And so they will do this through their interactions with other people and by watching everyone else in the room. And one of the classic things we see repeatedly is people will say, how did you sleep? And then narrow their eyes and look at someone. And so when people are answering that question, the person is probably collecting evidence to support a theory they already have. And so if you suspect someone is being a traitor and you say, how did you sleep? And they say, oh, I didn't have a good night's sleep last night. No, I'm really tired today. And they go, aha! Evidence that they are a traitor because they have not slept well because they were in the traitor's turret last night, plotting murder. Or they say, oh, I didn't have a good night's sleep last night. You go, aha! Evidence that they are a traitor because their conscience is getting to them. They can't sleep because of the lies they are telling, the stress they are under. So imagine the same question, how did you sleep? And the person says, oh, I had a cracking sleep last night. They go, aha, they are a traitor because they know they're not going to get murdered, so therefore they can sleep well. We're us faithful, we're all. So it doesn't matter what the response is. If the person says, yeah, okay, it's like, well, what are they hiding? So again, we see confirmation bias, whereby the decision comes first, and then the evidence is gathered afterwards to justify the decision. The other thing that I've seen repeatedly in the breakfast room is you get the creation of group norms. So some people will be more chatty, some people will be more leader figures, some people will be more motherly figures. And then the group itself will just have kind of rules, unwritten rules that form amongst groups. But woe betide anybody who steps outside those rules. If anybody violates the expectations that that group has. And so we see that with Hugo, the barrister, in this the last series, whereby when the first person was murdered, Ben was murdered, Hugo sat at the breakfast table and was, I am outraged. I am outraged. They have murdered poor Ben, poor Ben. He was my friend. I knew him for all of a day. And then he went on at some length of this, and everyone around the table was like, that's not how we behave as a group. And so Hugo took himself as being part of that group and made himself not part of it. He looked different from the rest of the people, and that put a target on his back. He stood out massively relative to the rest and was banished that day. Harriet did the same. The sleuth who, at the confessional box, had nailed Rachel, nailed her as a traitor. Said, I know you're in that box. You're a traitor. I'm going to tell everyone tomorrow. And she went to the breakfast table, and she blew it. She massively overplayed her hand. She was overbearing. She was potentially aggressive. She was rude to other members of the group, and the group don't like it. They said, that's not how we behave. And she made herself look different and got a target on her back and was banished. So we're now in the castle itself and mingling round about, hushed conversations in different rooms. One of the things we often hear is that person's definitely a traitor. I know it 100%, they are a traitor. I can tell you that without doubt. And what we see here is classic illusory superiority bias. So all of us think we are better than average at almost everything. Now, if you look at the numbers, that doesn't really work. We can't all be better than average, but people do, and we see that particularly, we saw that with Amanda, the worryingly highly ranked as a detective in the police, who decided that Jade was a traitor. She collected lots of evidence to demonstrate that Jade was a traitor, and there was nothing that would sway her from that. Jade's a traitor, definitely is, definitely is. And of course, we as people watching it are like, no, she's not. So we have this illusory superiority bias. Another thing you often hear is, I can't imagine Jessie would do something like that. Jessie was lovely and sweet and smiley and friendly and warm, and so therefore people couldn't imagine that she could be a traitor. Do they not understand the game? People are chosen pretty much randomly to be it's not fundamental to their personality, but it's a classic halo effect. Somebody who's perceived positively in one domain is also perceived positively in other completely unrelated domains. So people who are more attractive are often deemed to be more sociable and friendly. People who are warm are often deemed to be more trustworthy. But these things are potentially unrelated, and again, as was demonstrated in some of our previous talks. Another thing you hear people talking about is if they get a shield in a mission, a shield that will protect them from murder. It's what everybody wants to get, both faithfuls, because it protects them, and traitors, because it allows them to murder anybody. And so when people get a shield, we see what is called an actor-observer bias, and they're the actor. And so if they get the shield, they say, I needed a shield because I'm fearing I was going to get murdered. I needed to get that shield. When they see somebody else get a shield, they say, well, they chose to get that shield. Why did they choose to get that shield? That's suspicious. But they don't think of their own behavior as being suspicious. In fact, they think it in a completely different light. And then one of my favorites later in the game is, why am I still here? And this is classic egocentric bias. Man alive, we're all the stars of our own shows, right? And so people are saying, if I'm still here, it must be because there's a plan to keep me here. I'm here because the traitors need me in some way. They've kept me here. And that leads people to become paranoid. And so they think, well, if I'm part of the plan and they've kept me here, then that means the people I'm really close to must be traitors because they're keeping me here. And in reality, the traitors can only murder one person a night, and so it's just there's too many people to murder, right? And so, but then we see in the celebrity traitors, there's this beautiful bromance between Nick Mohammed and the rugby player Joe Marler. They got on brilliantly and they described each other as Hundies. They were 100% faithful, both of them. They were going to take it to the end, arm in arm. And then Nick Mohammed was like, why am I still here? And then he's like, it must be because I'm being played by Joe Marler, who must be a traitor. And then he stabbed him in the back. He instantly chucked him under the bus and felt terrible for it. We saw it in the current series towards the end with Jack. Did the same to James as well, someone he trusted, and he changed his vote to because he's like, oh, James must be a traitor because I'm still here. On to the round table. So, something you hear frequently is we need to find a traitor. That's our number one goal. That's not what they're interested in at the round table. When they're at the round table, what they're interested in is not getting voted out, not getting banished. That's what they need to do. To survive, you need to not get banished, first of all. And so when they see the votes potentially going to go to one person, then people will jump on that because they're like, well, if they get all the votes, then I don't have to worry about getting banished. And so at the round table, it's not about trying to find a traitor if you're faithful. First and foremost, you want someone else to get banished. Second, you don't want to make yourself conspicuous to those other traitors. So you can do that by falling in with the crowd and voting someone else out. Maybe third, I won't want to find a traitor, but first of all, you want to get rid of someone else. I need to go with my gut. Oh no! If you've got issues with your gut, it's all of the semi-warm lasagna that you're eating off your knees every night. It's like, we've seen already, your gut gives you the wrong answers. If you're going with your gut, you're just saying, I'm just going to do something biased. I don't care. I'm just going to put someone's name down and whatever bias comes out, that will do. So one in our house that winds us up, it might wind you up, is yes, I've listened to everybody, what everyone's had to say, all the different evidence, and I'm going to vote for the same person that I've voted for in all the previous episodes. So I'm going to vote for Jade again. I'm going to vote for Matt again. And so, but I think it probably shows our bias more than the bias of the faithful. And so it is a form of bias, perseveration bias. People are more likely to persevere with a particular behaviour. Previous behaviours are the best predictors of future behaviours. But actually, we only get frustrated with it and shout at the telly because we know that they're voting for a faithful. We know that, but they don't know that, right? And actually, it might be pretty smart to vote for the same person again. Because if you vote, every time you vote for somebody, that sours your relationship with them a bit. Because people don't like getting voted as potentially being a traitor. And so if you vote for lots of different people, then you're going to end up souring your relationship with lots of different people. And then they might want to come after you in the future. Similarly, if you just vote for one person, there's a low chance of that person being a traitor. If you repeatedly change your vote for lots of different people, then you increase your chances of voting for a traitor, which potentially puts a target on your back. Now, given some of the people who perseverated in this way, I don't think that was what they were doing. I think they just did it because they were decided in their head that they knew better than everybody else. So finally, if you do come under heat, if in doubt, cry. If you cry, then you're going to get a powerful reaction from the other people in the room. You're going to get empathy and you're going to get sympathy. Because that's what we do as humans. We're social animals. We're drawn to have these emotional reactions. And if people feel empathy and sympathy for you, they are much less likely to put your name down in the future. Not only that, if you cry, it's not something that's associated with being a traitor. It's something that stereotypically, or in terms of halo effects, is associated with much more positive things. It's not associated with being cold and callous and scheming. But the third reason why you should cry is that even if someone doubts you, even if they think, I'm not sure, I think they're crocodile tears, if they vote for you in the future, they'll risk looking cold and callous. They risk by looking like they don't fit in with the rest of the group who are reacting in an empathic way. So, the end game. So what I've been trying to convince you of is that humans are not rational animals. We are rationalizing animals. But we are fabulous social animals. And so one of the things, again, that really made my heart soar in the current series of the Traitors was that end game with Stephen and Jack and Rachel. And Jack was out of it. Jack wasn't going to get any money because there were 2 traitors left. And Stephen was faced with a choice. He could write down Jack's name and he would get £50,000, or he could write down Rachel's name and he would get £100,000. And he chose to write down Jack's name. He chose to cooperate, he chose to trust, and he chose to be empathic to his fellow player, his fellow human. And that made my heart soar for him. It paints him in a very good light, but I think it also paints our species in a very good light when there aren't many good news stories around. At the heart of us as a species, we are cooperative and well-meaning and empathic and caring, and we should probably see more of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doug, and thank you for closing our evening. We now have some time for question and answer, so I'd like to invite all our speakers up onto the stage for answering some questions. So we're going to attempt to look at questions in the room here. We'll start with in the room first, and then I'll try and have a look at some questions online as well. So if you would like to ask a question, I would ask that you press, there's a little button on your panel here that says speak. If you'd like to speak, raise your hand, and then when it's your turn to speak, press the speak button. So any questions in the room to start with? Yes.
I just was going to ask you all, do you think you could have done a better job as a faithful in identifying the traitors, and why?
Hello. I don't think so. I think I would really be crap at the game. I think I would just be just shooting in the dark every time, and then when people would ask me, I would just say, I don't know, I'm just grasping at straws. I kind of feel like that's how the game operates anyways, where it's just noise on top of noise on top of noise, and I certainly wouldn't be confident in any of my decisions, though. I think that's for certain.
I think I would try to appear confident saying, hey, I am a psychologist. I know how mind works, but probably, yeah, I would miserably fail.
I think I would be better than average.
I mean, certainly after Travis's talk, I feel like maybe we would all be able to spot the lying a little bit better, or probably not.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions in the room? Yes, and then here.
I was just wondering, in the celebrity traitors, I don't know if you remember, but there was one round table where I think it was Stephen, he said, like, let's just not discuss, let's just vote. And I think that's quite an interesting idea, and I'm surprised they didn't do it, because, like, then you wouldn't be biased by anyone's decisions, and, like, the people you've become close with in the castle, you wouldn't be biased by any decisions. What do you think? Like, would that be a good idea for the faithfuls?
So I remember that very vividly, and I think there are reasons for thinking that might be a good idea, and I think the reason it will never happen is because it destroys the premise of the show. And so there must have been producers having heart attacks at the idea that they wouldn't have any discussion at the round table, because that's the main feature point and the focal point. But yes, I think there's a lot of reason for doing that, and it gets rid of something we've not touched on tonight around conformity, of the idea that people will conform to the opinions of other people and they won't actually give the opinions that they think themselves. And another way of doing it would be to have blind voting and not to reveal the votes. But again, that's fundamental to the concept as well. And so, but it's a brilliant point and a great way of thinking about how you can get round having these sorts of biases.
Any other panel members, or will we move to the next question? Okay, so we'll take one more in the room, then I'll go online. So there was a question over here.
So it's hard to know, because everyone's putting out different names and different theories, and some of them are right and some of them are wrong. And when they're right, like with Harriet, we tend to think she's brilliant, but then I suspect she would have been just as confident for people that she was wrong about, in the same way that that Amanda, the detective, was. I think there were people who had genuine theories which were accurate. So Jessie did. So she was right. She had nailed down what became known as the library theory. And people just pretty much ignored her because, she's Jessie, she's really nice and friendly. And then, you're speaking Jessie, right? Very good. And then let's talk about Jade again. And so yes, so I think there were some people in there who did seem to be pretty perceptive and did the logic. And someone described how they'd listed all the players and the number of times they'd been speaking to one another, and they connected the dots. But they didn't do anything with it. And they were just like, I realised that Rachel had never spoken to Stephen ever, but I didn't really do anything with it. And so, yes and no.
Can I think just to add to that, I was really impressed with Jessie, and I think one of the things that was impressive about her was that she wasn't relying on these nonverbal behaviors, and she kind of dismissed that in my view when I was watching the show. And she stuck to, I think, trying to deduce who was the traitor rather than just kind of go on these, looking for these nonverbal indicators, which I thought I appreciated that.
Okay, great. I'm going to read out a question we have online. Would any of the panel members have any recommendations for ways in which we can counteract, suppress or ignore our tendency to make quick judgments and also to counteract our biases? Any advice on how to do better?
I think personally what I try to do is I try to slow down, especially slow down and notice the judgment you are making. I'm not sure if you would like to add anything or...
Yeah, I think in the game is quite difficult because we are exposed 24 hours in a day to these people. So in a way, it's very difficult to detach. But beyond the game, just more broadly, I think being able to detach from the person you are judging, for example, not looking at them physically and like not forming a first impression of their face, for example, might be very, very helpful to be kind of more objective. An example of that might be selection for orchestras. In the recent years, orchestras are starting to select people with blind concerts. So basically, people don't see who are the musicians who are playing, just to not be biased too much by the physical appearance. Or what I think really works here in the UK is having CVs without photos, so that recruiters don't have so much information on you, and they just base their judgment and hiring decisions on your curriculum. I think that really helps a lot. So removing kind of information can make us more objective.
I think that's a really important point, and it's the idea that if you are in an organisation trying to remove people out of the decision-making process where you can, or remove the sources of bias using processes, and there's lots of different ways that you can do that. I think at an individual level, again, as Barbara said, slow down and question where your judgments are coming from. Don't be so confident about them, and to seek opinion from other people. And so I'm continually going and asking lots of different people, what do you think about this? What do you think? And getting them to give me their opinion, and then that helps shape mine. So.
Great. Okay, so we'll come back to the audience in the room. Any more questions here? Here? Yeah. Press it again, sorry, so the red light's on. There we go.
How many of you guessed the secret traitor? I know that editing makes it more difficult, but did any of you know who it was?
Correctly or incorrectly?
Correctly.
No, not even close. But the secret traitor was a brilliant twist for that reason, because it put us in the place of the faithful. And those round tables, someone stood up and you had no idea whether or not they were going to be a traitor or not. And I hope they keep that for the next series, because it was brilliant. Did you get it? No.
I guessed Jessie, so I was totally wrong. But my wife guessed Fiona. She just happened to guess Fiona, so she was correct. But yeah, I got it completely wrong.
No, I definitely didn't. I think Fiona was just so good in the game, and like she seemed so trustworthy, approachable, like more mom vibes, and yeah, was very tricky.
I unfortunately saw a spoiler, so yeah.
Any other questions in the room? Just raise your hand. Yes?
So I have a question to Doug. You mentioned that it's a nice environment for experiment, right? The Traitors, which, again, ethics committee would never give you approval for. So imagine that you are behind the scenes, right, watching all the unedited material. Are you able to kind of think about the research or experiment you would like to do with that group in that environment? Like, what would you like to study or research, you know, having access to all that kind of, you know, control and material?
Oh, it's literally my dream is to have access to that, and there's the possibilities are endless. We really are. And so within, I would love to be part of the production team for that and coming up with different twists to try and examine different forms of bias and just tweaking things in this way and that way, even just from who gets to go in which cars going towards the missions, because I think you could shape things in all sorts of ways by doing that, putting people into groups in different ways. And we see that in some of the missions. If people are on a mission together, they seem to bond as a group of 4 or 5 and then compete with the other groups, even though those groups don't really exist. So yes, I can't think of a specific thing, but certainly it occupies too much of my time thinking about experiments that I'll never be allowed to do. But.
It's like a researcher dream, huh?
Okay, there's one quick question online. For each of our panel members, if you were on the show, would you prefer to be a faithful or a traitor, and why?
I think I would prefer to be faithful because I am really bad at lying, and I think it would make it much easier to go about.
Yeah, same. I'd prefer to be a faithful, even if being a traitor might be more fun. So I might consider that when I will speak with Claudia.
I would be a faithful 100%. I think I would be the worst traitor and get voted off so quickly. So I think it would make really bad TV. I don't think the producers would choose me, but I think it's interesting how the producers decide on who gets to be a traitor. I think that's an interesting conversation. I'm not sure how they go about doing that. That'd be really cool.
So I don't know how they do that. I'd like to think it's just Claudia picks, but I suspect it's not. So I would. I've thought about this a lot as well. I would like to be a traitor because I'm a total control freak. I like to have everything. As people would have seen me outside trying to light flaming torches, and so yes, so I'm a total control freak, and so it's the smallest bit of control in the game lies with the traitors, or certainly the perception of control. And I also I think I'm often accused of being too straightforward and blunt and honest about things. And I'd quite like the opportunity to not do that and to be just utterly deceptive.
Thank you. What an insight. We'll turn back to the room. Any questions in the room? There's 2, first at the front.
Thank you. You should maybe make a suggestion for the next round to have all the participants as psychologists, like a special edition. That would be interesting to watch. But my question is, I think it's maybe to the first speaker, how universal are the findings about the perception of facial features? Is there any room for maybe like ethnic or cultural bias there?
So thank you. That's a very important question that I'm actually really glad you asked. The truth is that in a lot of psychology research, in a lot of face research, there is a severe lack of faces with any kind of diversity. So a lot of findings are often based on like white, young, adult faces. However, there have been studies from my supervisor, for example, as well, who has looked at these impressions across Chinese and British perceivers and in different languages as well, and faces as well. And they have found very many similarities, actually, between the 2 cultures in spite of the supposed cultural differences. So I hope that answers the question.
And there was another question over here. Yes?
If you were a traitor and you had the ability to recruit a faithful, who would you choose and why?
It's tricky because you don't want to get someone in who would be a loose cannon and sort of endanger things. It depends what you want them for. You might want them as a sacrificial lamb, so you want someone that you can throw under the bus. I'm starting to think like a traitor. So, yeah, I guess, but you also want someone who you want to be in the room with, who you're in kind of cahoots with as well. And so out of all of those people, I think possibly Jessie, actually, for a bunch of reasons, because she seemed smart, and people weren't going to suspect her as a traitor, and I suspect she would have been, good fun and honest as well. So.
I think my choice would have been Faraz, maybe, or Jessie. I thought Jessie was the secret traitor. I thought she would be a good choice from kind of the producer's perspective, but yeah.
Okay. Any questions this side of the room? So, yes. Press speak and a red light should come on. Okay, I'll repeat it in case it's quiet. Oh,
I'll use this one. I'm researching criminal justice, and notwithstanding Doug feeling heartwarmed at the end, do any of the things that you sort of see happening in the show, like, maybe concern you about their real-world applications?
Yeah, I think investigative interviewing, I think, can be, I mean, not to harp too much on Amanda, you know, she was really quite confident in Jade being a traitor, and there was a lot of confirmation bias, as Doug was mentioning. I think she was relying on improper, just unreliable evidence in her accusation or interrogation of Jade. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in investigative interviewing, basically, and I think there's some problematic techniques that are being used in the real world there that we need to clean up, essentially. I could go on, but yeah.
And I think there are other things that were disturbing in this show, and suggestions from other sort of similar shows where there seems to be potentially race-based bias or age-based bias or disability-based bias coming out in the way people are voting. It's quite difficult to tell from these very small samples, but certainly it's raised eyebrows, and I think we need to be mindful of what drives people's behaviour.
Okay, we just have 1 or 2 minutes left. One final quick question in the room? Yes.
This is maybe kind of very generic, but who do you think's got an easier game, the faithful or the traitors?
I think morally the faithful, obviously, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a very tough question. Probably both of the groups have kind of problematic things and like challenges. I think for the fact that traitors really need to keep remembering themselves to like control their behavior, and they keep have this need of try to think what others are thinking of them. That probably is most challenging compared to be a faithful. And they might also have this kind of impression to be under the spotlight all the time, as Doug was saying before, even if they probably are not. So I think that might be more tough and challenging.
Okay. You have, Travis, you
answer? Oh, I was just going to say, I think, generally, I think that it's harder for the traitors, but if the traitors work together, then that might be where the balance kind of tips in their favor, like in this last season. If they form a tight unit, I think it might be easier than being a faithful. But that's just my, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Our question and answer session's finished. I'll just hand over to Doug to close the session. Thank you.
Thank you everybody for coming along to support us and hopefully learn a bit about psychology and our shared obsession for the traitors. So this is obviously the first of a whole series, first of 12 in our series, celebrating the Department of Psychology, the School of Psychology and our history. So these are the next events that are coming up. I guess the Family Discovery event is a good one for all the family for coming in and learning cool things about psychology. We've got a really big event coming up in June, the Magic of the Mind, where we're taking over the art gallery, and we are coming together with the Aberdeen Magic Society. They are celebrating their centenary, and so we're going to combine magic and all things cool about psychology. So look out for that, but many other things besides. So you can find out more from the QR codes here. There's information about these things out in the hall as well. Oops, I've gone too far. We're also fundraising for our students, so we're trying to help our students with their future plans, their future careers, help those who are in hardship, so you can donate either by following one of these links, or there's a donation thing outside where you can just tap and give us your money. We'll spend it wisely on our students. But we're also always looking for participants to come and take part in our experiments. They might not quite meet up to the Traitors, but we do lots of cool things, and we always find out something new about the mind. And so before we close, I would like to thank all of you for coming along tonight on such a horrible night. It's proper Traitors-esque weather. It seemed to rain every episode this year. So thank you so much for doing that, for coming out to support us. Thank you to the estates team and the AV team up in their box up there. Thank you to them, to the catering team, to our fabulous panellists, our many student helpers, to Mauro Manassi sitting up at the back there, and Matt and Rachel, who did so much of the organising for this. And finally, above all, is Claudia Jackson herself, to Madge. But thank you, a safe journey home, and I hope you don't get murdered.
Thank you.